So, welcome back to the Telco Drift, a podcast exploring tech, telecoms, and other sci-fi story. And today I'm joined by Frank de Jong, Program Director, Quantum Safe Network at Orange Business. So, Frank, welcome to the Telco Drift.
Thank you very much, and it's good to be here.
So, first of all, as always, before we dive deep into the quantum world, and it's great to have an expert because I tried to talk a little bit about quantum before. Honestly, like I don't get much of what is happening there. But before we get there, can you just share a little bit about yourself, some interesting facts, and also you are a fellow podcaster, so it would be great also to get a little bit more information about what you're doing in that sense.
Okay, indeed. Now, first of all, you mentioned I work for Orange Business, and I'm part of a team called Emerging Technology and Incubation, which basically means that whenever there's a new technology coming to us, um, well, somebody appoints a new technology to me and say, so this is now your technology to look at. And a few years ago, quantum was the thing, and I had the same issue that you have today, and that means, what is it all about? And so that's one thing. Now, to the other things, a bit about myself. I live in the Netherlands, so I'm working in the Dutch office of Orange Business. I have a lot of hobbies, and one of them is, at some point in time, I decided that it would be a nice idea to make a podcast. And since my employer is sponsoring it, it's called Orange Business Radio. But in principle, we always try to avoid to make this a commercial break for the employer. So we always, and I think you were in one of the episodes, yes. You
Yes,
were
yes,
in
I
one of
was
my
in one of the
episodes, right?
episodes.
And so I always try to debunk some myths here and there, and let's say talk about unexpected consequences or unintended consequences. So yeah, that's where I get my fun. And I don't know how often your podcast comes out, but my podcast is very irregular. When we have a very nice episode, we just put this one.
What I like about the your podcast is the fact that both you and also your co-host Karam, like co-hosting you with a few episodes, you have almost a philosophical take on whatever aspect of technology you're looking at, whether it's like AI or you had a couple of episodes on quantum as well, and I find that there's like that sort of really is that message is delivered to the audience, right? That is not sort of a sales pitch, but is rather like guys really trying to understand
Yeah.
pros and cons of a technology. So definitely recommend, and it's gonna be gonna have the link to the podcast in the description of the episode.
And every now and then, especially when I do this with Kerem, so I have a few other co-hosts here and there as well. But whenever I do this with Kerem, we always need to fight the urge to become Statler and Waldorf, the two old guys on the balcony in the Muppet Show. Because when there is a new hype, we always start saying boo boo, and maybe we need to fight that urge a bit.
You could be an analyst, definitely.
Let's not go there.
Yeah, not sure if you take that as a compliment or not, but like definitely that's something that I can I can see. But let's start getting a little bit more into that uncertain territories of the quantum world, um, and maybe let's get sort of from the beginning. So I don't think that a lot of people that are listening to my podcast really know a lot about quantum computing and the quantum world. So from your point of view as an expert, what does the audience needs to know about this technology?
Yeah, a lot of things, right? But I think one of the most dangerous things when you talk about technology like quantum is and I see that a lot when we speak to our customers, for example, is that we overwhelm them with technology, and because it's interesting because I also wrote down that quote. There was you talk about science fiction, right? And there was an author called Arthur C. Clarke, and he at some point said that any sufficient advanced technologies is indistinguishable from magic. Now, specifically for quantum, that is well, I think it's true. Simply because the idea behind quantum technology is quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics is so counterintuitive that actually like 100 years ago when this quantum mechanics was more or less, let's call it, invented or developed, the scientists were, well, they were really fighting. They didn't believe it because it was throwing over the existing beliefs and laws of physics. Um, so it makes it very difficult for people to understand. And there's also a whole bunch of myths around it right now. And actually, I believe, as with, and here we go again with the Stettler and Waldorf thing, as with all the new technologies, at some point in time, they become a hype. And actually, last week I did a presentation for an audience saying that quantum is a hype. Now, in principle, that is partially true, I think, but it's something that we really need to monitor. And then, specific thing when you talk about quantum, I'm specifically working on what we call quantum safe networks, and so that's only a small part of the whole scope. And there's a lot of other people working on things like quantum computers, quantum sensors, and all this type of stuff. Now, that is not the area that I'm active in, but that's interesting because when I talk to our customers, being a telco, being a network provider, the first question I get is, where can I buy a quantum computer? So I think there's still a lot of education to be done.
Well, what's interesting, I think I read that you can, or I listened somewhere, or maybe I just asked ChatGPT, honestly, one of the different options of getting information. The big companies, they are providing sort of as a service, some quantum computing as a service. Is that a thing that is happening and that could
Yeah.
become the norm?
Well, as with all the technology that is difficult, expensive, new, in the beginning it's always easier to rent or cheaper to rent, and I think that's what you see happening right now. Quantum computers are not only um, expensive, but they're also difficult to operate. It's not a thing that you easily put in your basement and say, "I operate this quantum computer." So right now, I think the best way to do it is actually to work with a quantum computer that you rent from somebody, or you have to build a whole team around you. And you see things are moving a bit, right? Because we had these. Well, there's a whole bunch of tech companies that make quantum computers. Now we can still debate the quality of those quantum computers or how much performance they will have. But there's now also, you see, there's a bunch of companies, hosting providers, for example, that buy a quantum computer and operate that in their data centers. But then there's the other thing where you need to be very careful because there's a whole bunch of quantum computing services that you could rent off hyperscalers or any other provider that are actually just simulators. They are not quantum computers at all. So I think this is where a lot of confusion already comes in.
So, can you just elaborate on that? So, effectively, you can rent something and you think it's quantum computer, but it's actually a program simulating what a quantum
Yeah.
computer would do. Did
Well,
I get that correct?
you did get that correct. So the point here is that in order to make meaningful applications for quantum computers, they need to have a certain size. They need to have a certain amount of what they call stable qubits. Now, we didn't discuss the idea of qubits and bits just yet, but it's relatively difficult to make computers that have stable qubits that remain stable for a longer period of time. So that is where the likes of, I don't know, Google and IBM, for example, are working on, and among them a lot of others as well. Um, so that technology is very much in development. But in the meantime, we need to get to a point where we have people that can program a quantum computer. And the way to program a quantum computer is much different than a normal classical computer. So you need to be able to start working on it and to teach yourself how to do this. So you need to be able to write quantum algorithms. Now that's something you do in the simulator before you put it on a real computer. And then once you have done it in the simulator, you think, okay, this could potentially work. Then you need to get to the point like how do you prepare your data in such a way that you can give it to a quantum computer and it will give you an answer. By the way this usually works in a quantum computer, I think that's funny as well, is we are very used to ask the computer a question and it will give you an answer. All right. So just a very simple question, 1 plus 1. Well, we know the answer is 2. Any computer will tell you the answer is 2. The way a quantum computer works is it doesn't tell you what the answer is. It tells you which answer out of a broad range of answers will have the highest probability of being the right answer.
Okay, that's
So there you go already, right?
yeah. I'm already having a mental meltdown. It's definitely not. I mean, and I imagine your job must be like extremely difficult because you need to get those very complex, uh, technologies and concepts, and I imagine that some of the people that you're talking to in the, from your customers or potential partners may not necessarily be experts on this.
Yeah.
So there's a bit of translating complex stuff.
Yes.
But the other thing, so you mentioned qubit, and as sort of that the versus bit. Can you again explain for the average listener what's the main difference? And
Yes.
also,
Yeah, I
yeah, no,
can.
just let's start with that, one step
Yes.
at a time.
Okay. So qubits versus well, classical bits, right? So, and I don't know, well, probably most of your audience is relatively technical already. So a bit we know is a 0 or a 1. We use that as the basic, well, minimum information element in a computer. Now, quantum computer has that as well, or quantum technology uses a basic element as well, which is called the qubit, it's a quantum bit. Now, in principle, and some people may say they're a 0 and a 1 at the same time, which is a bit of an oversimplification. The idea is there is a probability of this qubit representing a 0 or a 1, and you do not know what it is until you measure it, so until you monitor it. Um, the official story around this is about the Schrodinger's cat. You know, my shirt is also about. So it's about the cat you put in the box, right? And then they say the cat may be dead or alive until, and you will only know until you watch. But I rather explain it as flipping a coin. So if you flip a coin, it rotates in the air, and it's head tail head tail head tail. Well, basically you don't know what it is until you catch it and look at it. Um, and with a qubit, it basically chooses at that moment in time whether it's a 0 or a 1, so whether it's a head or a tail when we look at the coin. Now that's strange. It's strange behavior because you say, it's either head or tail. No, it chooses its state at the moment you monitor it. Now, so if you do not monitor a qubit, and let's assume this qubit remains stable forever, which is, by the way, not the case, but once you measure the qubit, it chooses its state. So that makes it relatively difficult. And one of the other, that's by the way what they call superposition. So, and when you monitor it, it falls out of superposition and it chooses whether it's a 0 or a 1. Now, another thing that makes it very interesting in the quantum world is the other property, which they call entanglement. So now we have two coins or two qubits, and they are entangled, which basically means they keep track of each other's state. And if I have one qubit on one side, and in quantum we always call the A side Alice, and then the B side we call Bob, and Alice looks at her qubit, as I said, it will choose its state. But at the exact same moment, somewhere on the other side of the universe, the entangled qubit from Bob will also choose its state, and it's going to be the opposite state of the qubit that Alice has. So it's completely opposite. And that is, well, that's what they call entanglement. And that's, by the way, something that way back when Einstein called spooky action at a distance. In his mind, this couldn't be happening, but it is happening.
Okay, so you mentioned as well that sort of they cannot stay in that state for a long time, so they are
Yes.
susceptible to noise and interference. And I know that there are attempts to get sort of quantum error correction and
Yes.
that sort of thing. So
Now,
how
specifically in quantum
yeah.
computing, you see that there are two technologies, two tracks of development ongoing. So the first one is about how can we make qubits that are stable and not sensitive to noise. So that's one track. And then there is this other track, and that's basically what Google is working on a lot, is how can we make the error correction so good then we don't really care about the noise, or we care less about the noise. So those two tracks of development are actually building on top of each other, and they are accelerating each other. So that gets us to computers that become better, quicker, more stable at some point in time. And right now, by the way, there's a third element, which is also an interesting element, and that is most of the quantum computers today, they need superconducting qubits. And in order to get to superconducting, you need to cool them down to a very low temperature. Now, that makes a quantum computer big because the quantum chip itself is not so big, but the fridge around it and the isolation around it makes it very big. So if we could get to a point where, for example, you could use photons or other elements that do not need those low temperatures, then it becomes much easier to actually build a quantum computer that's scaling easier, for example. And we saw that, I think 2025, yeah, last year, um, Microsoft announced that they had this Majorana chip, and they were actually claiming that their researchers had developed a semiconductor that could do quantum computing and hold qubits um, without the need for superconductivity. So that felt like a big blow to to the whole world of quantum, and in the end, it was proven not to be a correct interpretation of the research paper. You know the way this works. A researcher write a paper. By the way, they already wrote that in 2018. They write a paper and they say, "Well, this could mean that this and this and this," and then it goes a few steps, and then it gets to the marketing department, who then says, "You know what? We found the solution to the biggest problem in the earth, so we are going to change the world," and it didn't happen. Now Microsoft's still working on it, as far as I understand. So maybe at some point they will find it, but they didn't find it just yet. So those are the things that bring us faster, quicker to a new, bigger quantum computer. Um, but we'll have to see how that goes. And we see messages going around and flying around every day. Some of them are really bold claims, and some of them you think, okay, let me have a look at that in a bit more detail. And one of the most important things is about the power of a quantum computer, because and that brings it pretty quickly to what I'm doing right now, because quantum safe networks. There's a lot of potential use cases, but there's one use case bringing the unintended or not so happy consequences. One of the things that a quantum computer could be pretty well at is breaking the encryption that we use today in the internet. And unfortunately, this has already been proven that the algorithm will work. It has already been defined more or less on what kind of quantum computer you would need for that. Whereas for other use cases, which like drug discovery or a new material discovery or all this type of stuff, the timelines are a bit more unclear. But for the breaking of encryption, we have a relatively good view on what the timelines there will be. So apart from all the woohoo stories, this is going to solve all the problems in the world, it's also going to cause one very big problem, and that is what my role is. I'm working on getting our networks and our customer networks in a state that we do not have to worry about that anymore.
And can I just stop you there for a moment before we dive sort of on your role and that opportunity? So the fact that you're mentioning that quantum computers could break the security in that we're currently using. So does it mean that, and I know this is a bit of a side question, like a curveball if you want, but does it mean that there are rogue actors that may have quantum computers that are using for nefarious purposes? Because we're talking about
Yeah.
big tech companies, so I'm assuming that they're not using
So
them for those things.
yeah, the problem with this always is when it's in a research domain,
Mhm.
researchers tend to publish all the breakthroughs that they have, because then other people can learn from it and they can build on top of that, and we all accelerate the research we are doing. But I'm a bit concerned that once you get to a point where you're close to getting an application that you like, people may become a bit more quiet, especially if you are well, let's call it a bad actor, and you have sufficient money available, but you say, I'm now able to build a quantum computer that could easily break the encryption of, I don't know, my enemy, they will go quiet, right? It's not necessarily going to be Google that will be doing that, I hope. But I think, we all can point in a certain direction of people that may be doing this. Um, so once that computer becomes available, or once somebody has access to that computer, they can do whatever they want. Uh, the point here is you don't know when that will be, uh, but there is some, well, assumption on what the timeline would be around that. But more scary around this is that data storage nowadays is cheap. So I could be stealing your encrypted data today. Not much use because I cannot decrypt it, but I can hold on to it for I don't know, 10 years. And then maybe in 10 years, I have access to that quantum computer that I would need, and I could crack your data. Now, probably most of your personal data is not going to be that interesting so that I will put an awful lot of money in it. But I think there's data out there, and we can all think of examples that could be interesting enough to somebody who has sufficient money to just do this. And actually, we believe that at this point in time, this data is already being stolen. So the only thing you need to make sure is that, well, at some point in time, or that well, actually, you need to hope that the data that's being stolen today will only be cracked at some point in time where it has no longer value. So if the quantum computer will only be available in 35 years from now and your data is only 10 years valid or 10 years important, then there's no problem. But if your data is going to be valid for a longer period of time than the weight that we have for the quantum computer, then we already have a problem. So that's where I think the tension in the market is right now.
And it is, kind of scary and kind of fascinating,
Yeah,
in a
both.
sense.
Yeah.
Definitely scary because, like, you're thinking, okay, there is like these new potential breakthrough technologies, and you said, it could be used for, the creating new drugs, understanding that type of things, and yet one of the first, potentially use is like dangerous,
Yeah.
again, nefarious. Is like it's a bit strange, how technology always ends up, in the wrong
Yeah.
hands,
It's
if you want.
Well, this is how it goes, right? And we can have a philosophical discussion about internet. Years ago we said internet is going to democratize information, and it's going to make everybody's life much better. And there's an interesting discussion about that. But let's put that aside. Um, so there's a whole bunch of things that you need to look at. By the way, one of the other things that is interesting, I guess, is because I'm doing this, and then that's also the reason why I'm in this podcast, I guess. But I have a whole bunch of customers that call us and say, "Can you please explain what this is all about?" And one of the things that I need to do is translate the technology stuff into tangible stuff for
Mhm.
board members, for example. And just a few weeks ago, I was presenting at a bank, at the board of a bank, and they really said to me, we were thinking that this whole quantum story was going to, well, not important for us because it will only happen after my retirement. And that
Oh,
made me think a bit. And that is actually what I see a lot. I'm not saying all the customers are well, silly, but I think there's still a whole bunch of education to be done. Now we see there's a lot of um, well, marketing. There's a lot of noise and buzz around this right now, and not only because we started it that from Orange to explain, this is what we want to, or this is what we think is important, but you see that all kinds of regulators are picking up on this as well, and but it feels a bit like this Y2K problem, you know. So
mm.
the Y2K problem, well, I think we remember that. Right? One thing, there's something happening to my chair. The Y2K problem, we remember that, right? So we were scared of everything. And the interesting thing was we did not know what was going to happen, but we knew exactly when it was going to happen. And with the quantum threat, as we call it, there's a bit of a different problem because we do not know when it's going to happen, but we know exactly what will happen. And the point is, so it's the encryption we use today. It's the certificates that you use today. It's all the stuff that has some form of, as they call it, asymmetric encryption. So all the public key infrastructure stuff that people use. Sorry for all the technology. Um, but the main point here is your secrets will no longer be secret. And you can no longer trust people to be who they say they are. So you really need to work on that because actually, specifically for a bank, it's nice to have a safe. But if you just give everybody the key to the safe, then what's the point of a safe? So that's the problem we are focusing on at the moment.
So effectively, what you want to do with your clients, you want to future proof
Yes.
their networks. Like a little bit of the challenge with cybersecurity that's sort of broadened up a little bit. Cybersecurity in general is that you're asking people to pay for nothing to happen effectively, in a sense. So you
Yeah.
want to avoid that
Well,
anything happens, and it's not
yes.
always an easy sale, is it?
Well, actually, in our point of view, it's not even sale, right? Of course, when you do something new, everybody will ask you, how much money are we going to make on this?
Mhm.
But I think, and that's a call to action for everyone in the market, um, this very quickly will become a hygiene factor. So the idea would be if I always compare that to a car, right? Nobody will buy a new car anymore without any airbags in it. So if you were to buy, rent, whatever, a new network, for example, I think one of the questions you should ask is this quantum safe or quantum resistant? And that's just the networking part. But you need to do that for every application that you buy, use, rent. So it's not even an additional value. Probably pricing will go up because technology is a bit more difficult, but it's not something that you would sell as an option. It's not. That's at least not what we are doing. We're not going to our customers saying, we have this very nice stuff. Can you just pay more?
Okay.
And on top of that, right, there's not only the networks for the customers, but for us as a telecom operator, it's important that our networks are quantum resistant as well. Now, I'm using, by the way, two words, quantum safe, quantum resistant, right? And I think it's important to note as well that when you talk about this quantum safe and quantum resistant part, um, quantum safe, in my opinion, and just putting a definition here, in my opinion, is you made it in such a way that the quantum computer will never be able to break your encryption again. That is virtually impossible, but there is technology.
I was about to say that sounds like very,
Yeah.
very ambitious. Like,
Well, it's at least ambitious, but there are technologies out there. You use quantum technology, not a quantum computer, but something, for example, called quantum key distribution,
Mhm.
where you use the laws of physics to protect your key exchange. And the idea behind that is if you have, I explained the entanglement, right? So if we use
Yeah.
this entanglement with qubits in superposition, and we use that to send a key from Alice to Bob, and somebody in the middle is looking at my key, so they're looking at, then it falls out of superposition, like I mentioned before. So Bob will see that the qubit that he gets is no longer in superposition. So he said, I'm not going to use that. So you're not exchanging keys that somebody has been looking into. So that's protected by the laws of physics. Now, there's a lot of papers out there already that believe that it's possible to do side channel attacks on quantum key distribution networks. But until now, nobody has been successful in that. And then there's this other thing that well, the whole market is jumping on, and it's called post-quantum cryptography. Now, the important thing here is, even though it says quantum, there's nothing quantum in there. It's
Okay.
just more complex um, mathematics. So the encryption we use today is used on very simple mathematics, but very difficult to reverse engineer.
I think they're very simple. Is up for debate depending who
Yeah,
you're
okay.
talking to. You know.
Relatively simple going
Yeah.
forward, but very difficult going backward. I think that's the most important thing. So every little processor can do the forward calculation on this encryption, but the backward is very difficult. Even if you use the biggest supercomputer that you have available today, cracking an RSA 2048 key will take about 10,000 years. So nobody's going to wait for that. Um, but if you use a quantum computer that is big enough, that would be, well, 24 hours or even shorter.
Wow.
So you can wait for that, right? If you
Yeah.
want it bad enough. Um, Now, this post quantum cryptography is a different way of mathematics, and it is much more difficult for a quantum computer or for any computer to break that. The problem is those algorithms, they have been developed, they have been tested, but they have not been tested so long as all the other encryption today. And what's interesting is that initially, for example, NIST started out with six candidates. It very quickly became four, but out
Mhm.
of the four, one of them has already been cracked
Okay.
without a quantum computer, just on a single laptop. Um, so the point here is about post-quantum cryptography. I think it's a good solution because it will buy you time before you get to the other technology later on down the line. Um, and so you need to be able to do it, and you need to implement that into your network, and that's what we are doing in our customers' networks, in our own networks at the moment. But uh, I think it's very important for people to realize that this again is buying ourselves time. It's a bit like, the Y2K problem what had something to do with people putting year 99 in their software, right? So now they said, you know what, we'll put a bit of a longer year field in it. Now, if they've done it well, then it's the complete year. If they thought, you know what, we'll just push it to, let's say, 2100, for example, then okay, we bought ourselves some time, but the problem will come back again.
Yeah.
And that's basically what you will see happening there as well.
So it's a little bit like kind of a race against time in a sense.
Always.
So and it's but yeah, it's very very interesting because it's kind of something impending, right, on you, and you need to buy more time and you need to fix it. At the same time, you're still developing the technology, so it's like it's developing one side and the other. But if we sort of change a little bit the conversation,
Uh-huh.
I mean, as a telco, imagine some of your peers are also exploring this. I'm
Yeah.
just curious, are you guys doing something together, like sharing information, going the same direction, or is each telco who are notoriously not
Yeah.
particularly skilled in working together, doing his own thing?
Now, that's an interesting point, right? Telcos, in principle, have always been working together. Uh, yeah, I see you laughing, but it depends a
Yeah.
bit on where you look at. But the simple fact that I'm in the Netherlands and you are not in the Netherlands, it already needs telcos to work together. Otherwise, we could not have this connection. So that's one. Same for telephony networks, right? The Dutch PTT years ago connected their network to, well, all the others, and we could just call the whole world. So that's the telco thing that we need to work on. And I'm seeing this, and I saw your smile because we're all competitors as well. But and if you look at companies like Orange Business, for example, we have an ambition of being a global operator or a European operator or whatever we call ourselves. And in that sense, we compete with each other. Now, specifically talking about quantum networks, is there's one thing in quantum networks. If you want to transfer qubits from one location to another, there is a distance limitation that you can do at the moment. And it's not because we use fiber optic cables to do that. And if you want to send single photons, so it's like a tiny piece of light, it's only a single photon. You send over a fiber optic cable, it gets attenuated, of course. And after approximately, well, 150 kilometers of commercial grade fiber, you can no longer find your photon anymore. But you cannot amplify it using like the normal amplifiers that you have in fiber optic cables, because then you will break the superposition. So you need to do something else. And so it also means that if you want to do this between, let's say, Madrid and Oslo, you will need involvement from all kinds of entities in all the countries that you're passing. So, in order to be able to do a quantum network or a quantum key distribution network, you will need to work with other telcos. And we carefully look around what's happening with other telcos, what they are doing, and there are several mechanisms. There's something that, for example, two telcos, they can just call each other and see how can we connect our networks. But of course, there's a whole bunch of other things happening as well within the how do you call it, the working groups of the likes of GSMA and so on. But there's also some drive from governments like the European Union, for example. So specifically looking at quantum networking, there's this quantum flagship program from the European Union in which there specifically are several working groups working on quantum networks spanning Europe. And of course, you can then sign on to that, and you will see that when there is a network that's spanning, for example, well, Central Europe, you see that Orange is there, as you know, former France Telecom. You see Deutsche Telekom is there, and when it spans, for example, the UK, then of course BT will jump on that as well. So I think that's where a lot of the cooperation sits.
Okay, that's more promising than I'm usually hearing.
Yeah, and then actually on top of that, because getting over the fiber is there's some debate about that, depending on how you who you ask. People will say, and it was funny because we just before this recording we were talking about Wi-Fi versus fiber, or versus cable, right? So depending on who you talk to in quantum networking, there are people that believe that satellite is the answer, and there are people that believe that fiber is the answer. But in principle, especially if you want to cross the Atlantic, for example, then definitely satellite is the answer. But I just recently watched a webinar from a professor at TNO in the Netherlands who said, well, actually, after a certain amount of kilometers, satellite is going to be the answer to do all of this. The problem is we don't have those satellites. They're not launched yet. So technology for transponders to go on the satellite has been developed, is readily available. But now somebody needs to launch a bunch of satellites that have those transponders on it. And that market is just not big enough yet. So the European Commission or the European Union has said they are going to launch something called Eagle One. It's one satellite, but Eagle One. But that's a test satellite that was due to go up. I think it was already said in 2025. Then it was promised in January this year. And the last thing I heard was it's going to be 2027. But that's a evaluation satellite. And then after that, we will get hopefully something like Eagle Next. But that's not going to be before 2030. So it is promising, but it's going slow. So you would hope that there would be, let's call it a Starlink type of company that just says, you know what, I'm done with it. Just shoot up a few of those satellites and we're in business. But I have no information on that yet.
I mean, I'm going to show a little bit of my ignorance here, but so is the idea that you're going to send then the qubit and information using intersatellite laser links?
Yeah.
with the satellites. Is that
Yeah,
how?
so there's it depends a bit on what you need to do. If you need to do quantum key distribution, then the only thing you do not need to have a end-to-end connection. It's okay if you have a per hop connection. So you have a connection with the satellite. It then stores your information there for a short while until it has a connection with the other endpoint that you need to get to,
Okay.
and it will then go down there.
So just
Now,
expecting the satellite to effectively
yes,
rotate across.
it
Okay.
Yes. And the interesting thing is with the QKD satellite, for example, you will see that typically about 20 minutes every 2 hours. Now, the problem here is that's an interesting because you're sending photons again. So photons again are very small particles of light. So if there's clouds between you and the satellite, your photon will not get there. So you need to have clear sky. The other thing is um, if it's sunny or if there's a lot of light coming at you, so a lot of light means a lot of
Mhm.
photons, how do you find your own photon in all that light? Now, of course, there are things like frequency filters, so you need to use a specific color of light, but still, you will get blinded by all the other light that you get, especially when it comes from the sun. So there's a lot of work on that.
Interesting, and definitely like everything sounds like sci-fi, honestly.
Yes, yes,
And it's a bit of a sort of segue from this, but there's been a lot of talk recently about sort of data center in space or computing in space. And like for the little I understand, I do see kind of the vision, like eventually you're gonna move there. Then you're not gonna replace everything, right? But I do see that as an idea for like sort of the next
yeah,
step if you want of tech evolution. And it seems that even in the quantum world, that is something that is at least being considered, and then we'll see how feasible it is. And at the end of the day, probably is going to boil down to the cost of it. You know,
yes. Well, I think that's always the case, and there will be a point on who controls it.
yeah.
So who gets there first? And I think that's something to be, well, slightly cautious about as well.
I mean that would bring us in a very different tangent of sovereignty and politics
Indeed,
and so on.
indeed.
So probably is going to go a little bit beyond this podcast, but
Yeah.
clearly there is like.
There's one other thing that would be interesting and probably nice. You mentioned sci-fi again.
Mhm.
Um, there's something called quantum teleportation.
Okay, please
And
please
that
more.
is an interesting topic because, well, basically, it has something to do with teleportation of information,
Mhm.
and it's too technical to explain on this podcast. And actually, I don't even think I can explain it at this moment. Um, and But that's good, right? Because there was if you search on YouTube for that, there is I don't know exactly which professor, but it's a very old black and white movie from a professor explaining to an audience quantum mechanics. And he said, right now, I'm the only one who does not understand quantum mechanics. And it's my job to, by the end of this lecture, make sure that you also do not understand quantum mechanics. And it's difficult. But the interesting thing about teleportation, it ties into, what was it? I think it was Star Trek, right? The beam me
Yeah.
up thing. Now, teleportation in quantum world is slightly different because it's not being used to teleport you or me, but it's about teleportation of information, and that could be part of the answer to span at least the world with quantum information. But it's very interesting to read about or to, well, whatever your mode of learning is, to watch some YouTube videos about. Um, I became very enthusiastic about the whole topic because it triggers my inner nerd.
Definitely, when you start talking about quantum teleportation, it rings sort of that the sci-fi bell. It's like, okay, wow, gonna look a little bit about that. But since we're like almost running out of time, and we are talking about sci-fi stuff, effectively,
Hmm.
which is good part of your business. I'm trying to probably you have heard. I'm trying to push it to be this beyond just the pure analyst type of conversation into more like generic stuff. So do you have any, by any chance, any recommendation from any readings, any books, any movies, anything that
Yes.
even loosely related with the sort of
Well,
sci-fi or technology in general that you think,
yeah,
okay, this is something that should be on your radar?
I'm reading a lot, and I'm for me it's sometimes it's a bit like an Alice in Wonderland type of thing because I read a book, and then in a book somebody says, well, actually, as so and so said in this and this book, and then I put that on my list as well. So it become the list of books is becoming bigger and bigger all the time. But
Yeah.
one of the good books that I was advised by one of the partners we work with, it's a book called Quantum 2.0 by Paul Davies. Because the whole problem with quantum technology and quantum mechanics is that if you are not good at it, if you did not learn all this stuff good enough when you were in school, it's very difficult to jump in and to understand what this is all about. Because most of the books, believe it or not, they start with mathematics on a level where I think either we did not study it or we've completely forgotten what it was all about. Um, and this Quantum 2.0 book actually, the reason why they call it 2.0 is because Quantum 1.0 was the quantum mechanics that started 100 years ago. And the point is, author is making is that we're now getting to the point where we're looking at the use cases and how is it actually going to work. And that's why he calls it Quantum 2.0. I think that's a very interesting book for people to read because it has a certain level of technology, but not so much. And there's no mathematics in it. So it just explains why things are working, and also it's a relatively recent book, so it also describes where we are, well, right now or a year ago. So that's I think the top read for now.
Okay, perfect. Thank you very much. And yeah, definitely adding that. Reading list is one of those things that always keeps growing, right? He's
Yes,
never gonna catch up with it. Just adding more and more stuff, and then
yeah.
you can never really. You're never in positive, like
And
you can.
I have a bit of an obsessive, disorder for this because once I start a book, I feel that I need to finish it. In my life, there were only two books that I did not finish. So,
I have just a handful of books that I didn't finish, and they haunt me. They're
yeah.
looking at me as like,
No, actually, there was one, somewhere during, totally not technology, somewhere during, I don't know, as a Christmas present, I got a book from this book, part one from President Obama, former President Obama.
Mhm.
It's a very big book, but the guy make a point, please. And then it actually said that it was only part one, and I thought, I cannot even finish part one. Let's not get me part two. So that's one of the books that I just put away. It's not haunting me. I just took it out of the library, gone. Um, but for the rest, Quantum 2.0, a very good book.
Yeah, perfect. Frank, thank you very much for joining me on the show and for all the information. And for anyone that is listening, thanks again for listening. And if you're interested in Orange Business Radio, link is gonna be in the description of the show. And have a great day, everyone. Thanks again.
Thank you. Bye bye.